Oh,
She's like Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, all those guys. I mean, Tucker Carlson goes for a job at the CIA when he leaves university, and they didn't give it to him. Of course, they didn't give it to him. Then he becomes the biggest presenter in the world. I put my tongue in my cheek and I say to Candace Owens. Candace Owens comes along. She does a load of videos where she calls it "One Nation Under Blackmail." Why is that? So that people, when they type in "One Nation Under Blackmail," will find Candace Owens and not Whitney Webb's books. Candace Owens is a function of it, and the function of the fifth generation warfare is to get as many people speaking about this stuff as possible. So to have people and to boost these people, what was the QAnon files saying about General Michael Flynn all the way through? You can trust Michael Flynn. You can trust Michael Flynn. You can trust Michael Flynn. What's Michael Flynn's recent books been about? Military grade, fifth generation warfare tactics, and how to utilize them.
hello, dear friends of the truth. My guest today is Johnny Vedmore. Hi, Johnny.
Hello there. How are you?
I'm good. I don't know how you feel because you are in the Epstein files. How does that feel?
It's a peculiar feeling. I get to say to people when they talk about Epstein, I get to say, I'm in the Epstein files, and they go, and then I go, no, I'm in the Epstein files, and their face turns. It turns red, blue, purple, fear. They move their kids away. But yeah, I am officially in the Epstein files and in the J mail because, of course, the Department of Justice was warning the people who I was doing a series of articles about and their links to the CIA. The Department of Justice was warning them that I was doing those articles and informing them that I was doing the articles. They were colluding with the other side in what is one of the greatest criminal conspiracies that has been uncovered in US history.
And were you surprised to find your name there? Because it's some kind of confirmation because you already said they are kind of harassing you, and now you see that they really watched you.
I think it'll come up again and again. I think if the full release, eventually, the holes within the legal case and how the legal team acted during the years before the 9 to 10 years before Epstein's death on both sides and who they were actually working for. Once more information of that comes out, I think then you're going to see a lot more file releases, and those file releases will include the legal team's conversations, including about myself, my ex-partner, mother of my child, Whitney Webb, and a few other people who were heavily involved in researching the Epstein case very early on. One of the things I'll say about, I see loads of people, and though it's a funny line to be able to say I'm in the Epstein files, and people have a little giggle with it, and they enjoy it very much. There's also like another thing about this is there's hardly anybody in there who's in there for good reasons, because they were investigating, because they were shaking the pot. But I think there would be if they release all the files. They just can't show you that. If they show you that, you'll work out it's not just me or and my ex and whoever else who were investigating Epstein. There was a lot of people asking a lot of questions, and these things, they tend to barrel roll. And the more for them, we're in the era of fifth generation warfare. So for them, they want as much information out there as possible. So I would expect that there's going to be a lot more. I expect that there's going to be massive smear campaigns against me, that the mainstream newspapers and channels will probably start smearing me sometime in the next 2 years, because a lot of the information I have is extremely dangerous.
Yeah, and you have a very interesting theory that the whole thing is set up to fail. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Well, I think happens quite a lot within these cases. But if you actually watch what has been going on in the Epstein case, the legal team was basically co-opted from day one. So from about 2013, when Virginia Giuffre really first comes back to start the legal case with Bradley Edwards, on the very first day, Edwards was contacted by J. Stanley Pottinger, one of the most prolific CIA agents throughout human history, throughout the history of the CIA at least, one of the most amazing intelligence agents. He's got he had a fantastic history. He was involved in Watergate, the assassination of Martin Luther King. He was involved in Kent State, the standoff at Wounded Knee, the assassination of Orlando Letelier. He was central to organizing and arranging Iran-Contra for the CIA and ensuring his great friend George H.W. Bush was put into the White House with Reagan. He shared an office with Epstein. This is Epstein's victims lawyer, but he shared an office with Epstein in the early 80s. He ran guns with Epstein during Iran-Contra. He lived 500 meters away from Epstein's House of Hell, 358 El Brillo Way. He lived just across the other side of the road in 616 Island Drive for many years. So the two shared a lot, and he was the one who co-opted Epstein's victims' cases. And from that point on, there was a very interesting thing that happened. Perpetrators who had been involved in the operation, who had groomed children en masse for money while they were adults, suddenly became the perpetrators became accomplices. Some of the accomplices became victims, and some of the victims were recategorized as basically non-existent. You know, pushed to the side. They stopped anybody from seeing that information. They started to control the case, and the control was on purpose. So there were certain people who were put into the case, and this is really important. There were certain people who were put into the case, and they created a lot of actions that would cause the case to fall apart. There's one woman I've written about in particular who was in a relationship with J. Stanley Pottinger. Her name is Maria Farmer. She is known as the first person who ever reported Epstein to the FBI. She's made a lot of hay off that, but if you actually look at the details, and I've seen the report to the FBI, she's saying, I took naked pictures of my younger sister and Epstein stole them from me. She's not saying anything about criminal enterprise. She's not saying anything about any other crime. She's saying, I took naked pictures of my little sister who's 13 years old and Epstein stole them from me. That's a very strange report to be, I was trying to take down the enterprise. Anyway, she was involved with J. Stanley Pottinger, employed by an organization called FAE from 2017-18 at least. And in 2019, she enters her first affidavit into the Epstein case, in the case versus Virginia Giuffre versus Ghislaine Maxwell. And she states about Alan Dershowitz going to Epstein's property and following girls dressed as schoolgirls up the stairs. It's one of the first moments where Maria Farmer enters into the case publicly, out loud, and at the same time, she's working for the CIA legal team that's trying to get the opposing legal counsel removed. So Alan Dershowitz, it looks like it's a legal move. She's being paid to enter in false witness statement. Now, this has happened all over the place. In actual fact, if you listen to Virginia Giuffre, her original accusation about Alan Dershowitz was she went to a house. She met him in this room downstairs. It was a kind of a library. It was a dining room. They had a conversation. Then she went upstairs, and what happened happened. And she explains it in detail. 3 years later, she said, I don't remember. I may have been mistaken. and withdraws all her it was meant the people who were put right at the top and gave testimony then changed their statements. Now, I've had other people who are classified as some of the most well-known named victims come into my life and feed me false information that they want me to report on, and they use their collateral as being main named victims of Jeffrey Epstein to be able to give me false information that I'll then report thinking that they are. And I've seen lots of other people do this. In that case, it was one. I'm reticent to name who that one is. It's not Maria Farmer. I'm reticent to name who she is. It'll come out eventually. But she actually fed me fake tweets or fake messages that she was supposedly having with Dan Bongino, or however you say his name, about the Epstein case. And it was a false account. It was a fake account. And once I rumbled her, I'd already rumbled her multiple times doing the same thing. The people who are in control of the case, the people who took control of the case, and this shouldn't be any surprise to anybody, were the CIA. The CIA needed to protect their back. Jeffrey Epstein was recruited by the CIA, ran guns in Iran-Contra for the CIA, was involved in basically managing the Democratic Party for a Republican-leaning CIA. He was a leadership training and selection interlocutor, and he was also an interlocutor between major international intelligence agencies, doing operations all around the place. And a lot of these people who work as spies are recruited from the people who they can trust the most, and that is the elite. So there's a massive, if there was a Venn diagram, the crossover between intelligence agents and elites have been very much basically a full circle ever since the 1940s, late 1940s in Western world, especially. Earlier than that, you could go back to 1917 and before with Russia and Willy Munzenberg. A lot of those people as well, they're the people who are in high society. They're people who have got links. They're people who have got connections. They choose people who they can trust, and those are the people who will do whatever for the state, whatever for the establishment. So I think the legal team was co-opted on purpose, and it was co-opted by J. Stanley Pottinger, but it'd already been, I think Bradley Edwards is extremely suspicious because he already knew the J. Stanley Pottinger and voices his concerns in his book, Relentless Pursuit. He says J. Stanley Pottinger was obviously working for the CIA. He asks him whether he's working for the CIA. From day one, he believes he's from the CIA, yet he forms a business with him. So if you know somebody is a criminal, mafioso, intelligence agent, and then you get into bed with them, that's suspicious. But if you've done it twice, that's even more suspicious, because you go back to 2007, 8, 9, and you've got Bradley Edwards working with Rothstein, and Rothstein ends up actually entering into some sort of legal battle with Epstein, because Epstein says in 2009, 2010, he tries to say a lot of the complaints Bradley Edwards' clients are making against Epstein at this point are part of Rothstein's £1.2 billion Ponzi scheme that he eventually gets sent to jail for 50 years for around that time. So these are all criminals. Bradley Edwards is in bed with Rothstein before he's in bed with Stanley Pottinger. And those two people are some of the, a £1.2 billion dollar Ponzi scheme is a pretty big deal. Being one of the most prolific CIA agents in history is a pretty big deal. Bradley Edwards gets into bed with these people, and ergo, so do all of the victims. Then they manage the victims. So the ones who will tell you the most don't have a voice. They're convinced to remain anonymous. Don't worry, we have these people who are our heroes who we put up. We have Virginia Giuffre, we have Maria Farmer, we have Sarah Ransom, we have all of these different people. We will put these up. They will be the face. When you actually look at those people worked. They're not they're not the girls who are being brought in by they're the girls who are bringing the girls in. So they already, you can see the ones who are named were not. They were being paid. That is a different thing than being a victim and being brought in. I mean, it would be Virginia, it would be Maria, it would be someone else who is bringing in these girls, and these girls are not bringing in anybody else. So there has to be an understanding what accountability is, what a victim is, what a perpetrator is, what an accomplice is. We've gone all crazy. No one knows what's up and what's down, and that is set up to fall apart.
Since there are heavy allegations that you made, so I invite everybody you just named to come also on my show, and because they can defend themselves. But you have also intensively written about it, so I will link to that also, because it's already getting a little bit complicated.
There's a lot of sources in there.
Yes, and so I always had a good impression of Maria Farmer, in part because she said something nobody else says, that they are looking down on Goyim and such. Isn't that the very nobody else did that, and it's a important piece of the puzzle.
She says she's Jewish, and she said about that. That's LinkedIn. If you go to the Potting a Legacy, and you scroll down, there's a video, Maria Farmer saying that was terrible. They made me look terrible. They made me look like I hate Jews. And I don't hate Jews. I am a Jew. I'm Sephardic. In actual fact, I didn't know how Jewish I was before, but I'm really, really Jewish. And I care loads about. She says the opposite. So she'll say one thing, and you'll hear it. You'll hear this word, and this happened a lot. So she went on Whitney Webb. She went on a podcast, the Unlimited Hangout podcast. She went on Jason Bamas. This is the 2019 time. She goes on those programs. She says a load of things like you're saying there that no one else has said. And everybody goes, oh my God, finally. Then she goes on to CNN and she doesn't say anything about any of that. She doesn't say anything about, she goes on NBC. She doesn't say anything about any of that. It is selective, and it is what's called, there was, if you know, there's a guy called Mike Benz in the US. He was part of something that was called the Frame Game. That was a Zionist operation to convince people that everybody was saying bad stuff about the Jews. So what they did, they employed people, including Mike Benz, to go and tweet really bad stuff about Jewish people, and that draws in all of the people who maybe agree with them for reasons that are true, and maybe agree with them for reasons that are false, but they all go to the same place, and then they all start shouting too, and they feel like they're at home because they got someone who agrees with them. And you can see, but to then join in with those guys, you then get controlled, and you become cattle. And I think if you look at Maria Farmer's statements all throughout, you cannot be selective. She went round and she talked to loads of different platforms, and then had those platforms remove those podcasts within a week, 2 weeks, so people would have heard her say those things, and then when they go and look back on it, they can't find it at all. And that is purpose. That is get into the mind and then deny that you ever said it. And that is what Maria Farmer's done over and over again. Some of her videos are esoteric. They are completely, she has said the complete opposite to what she said before. So I understand that, but there's a lot of people who are being really rational with how they talk about what is a Zionist. It's not even a Zionist takeover of society. Is the Zionists became an exceedingly good tool for neoliberal behavior, neo-con behavior, all of this. You know, the Zionists are able to get it to infiltrate things that have a group mentality. So anything that is groups and organizations can be quickly taken over by Jewish lobby groups. I come across this every single day, but we talk about it rationally like that. We're able to make sense of it. If we're just saying, oh, they hate the Goyim and stuff. Yes, we know that, but that's, you know, someone who wants to evoke the worst in you will also use that, whether it's true or not. They will also use that to bring you to the place where the worst will come out.
But didn't she say that Ghislaine Maxwell told her she can't join the country club because she's not
liar.
Jewish?
I don't. I just don't. I really think a lot of what she said was lies. I mean, you go through it. She said she was in hiding for 20 years. She said she was hiding from Eileen Guggenheim, and she was hiding from all the rest of them. She was in the art show in 2006 that was being judged by Eileen Guggenheim. That was being judged by the lady who was supposed to be doing all of the reports on her. She was mixing with the same circles. She was tweeting in 2011, "Can anybody get me in touch with Eileen Guggenheim?" This is all recorded. She was public. She was out public. She had her own website, mariafarmer.com, under her own name while she's in hiding, in fear of her life. She also, the actual story, when you hear the story, she infantilized about the assault she claims happened with Epstein and Maxwell. She infantilizes herself when she talks about herself as a 24, 25-year-old. And it is a very strange one because Epstein and Maxwell weren't really into women who were 24, 25. None of it makes sense. It breaks their entire profile, and criminal profiles don't normally break. So there's loads. It's not just the 1, 2, 3 things. Not only was she working for the legal team that was wrapped up in the CIA, registered down at their company, on their company website. Not only did she enter an affidavit while she's being paid by the legal team, which undermines the case in loads of different ways. Not only did she lie about being in hiding, not only did she have a website, not only did she try and get in touch with Guggenheim, not only did she appear in art shows. There is loads of lies within that she tells, and they go to our baser instincts. They make us believe, oh, well, people are like that. Oh, that is true. I thought that a country club would probably do that. But it's not about whether you're Jewish or not. It's about whether you got the money. Because I can promise you, there is no Jewish country club in the world who's not going to accept a billionaire through the door who's from any nation on earth. I have sat in, but I went to I was in Chile at one point. My child and Whitney live in Chile, and I was in Chile at one point, and we had to stay in Santiago mid-flight. We were going back to wherever. We were going back to Britain for a bit, and I had my a baby in my arms, and I'm in a lift. I'm in this big hotel, and in through the doors of the elevator come these 3 Jewish men who were part of some form of Zionist conference that was going on in the hotel at the time. I sat listening to these people talking, and they don't care. They care about influence, power, and money. Whoever can bring them that. The rest is turning it into a cartoon. It's a cartoon image of what the Jew, what they wanted to do is they wanted to paint Israel as being like, we're in control of the CIA, where the CIA are actually in bed with Israel. So while people are viewing them through the Israel are puppeteers in control, the CIA becomes a victim of Israel. But the CIA are in business with the Mossad. So if the Mossad are seen as being in control and they've taken over every function of society, then we go, oh, poor victim America, and we allow the biggest, most well-funded intelligence agency in the world to get away with everything, and we blame it all on the Jews, when it's actually Israel and it's America together, and it's Britain, and it's Canadian intelligence, and it's French intelligence. It's a big, grey, globalist intelligence blob that's taken over the world. It's a corporatist, technocratic monster that's developing everything. It's globalist. It is so globalist. And the Zionist and Jewish lobby groups are an important function within it, but they are a function. The arms don't move unless America moves. The head doesn't move unless America moves. Israel itself is just a 51st state of America. If America turned its back on Israel, Israel would no longer exist. It would cease to exist within months. within months. It would just
But
be
is it,
America turns its back, Israel is gone. So it is a 51st state. They are in bed. There is no victimhood in America. America are complicit with Israel. Israel are complicit with America. They've welcomed in the idea, especially of neoconservative ideology of Irving Kristol and the like, because it suits their ability to manipulate human beings and society. If you go to people who know how to manipulate the best and you give them a job and they can be distinctly seen as a different people from you, you can use that as a conduit to deflect all of the responsibility, all of the accountability. And if you look at where they learnt and where they really honed in this skill, it was during Operation Condor, mixed multinational intelligence operations where sanctions are carried out by 3 or 4 different countries in another member state country or member intelligence partner country, so that country like Chile could get rid of dissidents, and it would be a Guatemalan and a Puerto Rican or whatever who was actually carrying out the sanctions. The reality is they're all in it together, and so it really works. And this is why the frame game was so important. This is why work of people like Mike Benz has been so important in the past. This is why the work of people like Maria Farm and the way they see these things are really important. It gives us this caricature of poor old America, all those evil, conniving Israelis, where in actual fact, they're all a bunch of bastards.
I agree they are all in it together, but isn't the whole point of operations like Epstein to get a grip on America through the Israel lobby and so on? I mean, how you portrayed like the 51 state, I would object to that, because I mean APEC, it's just a fact, and that all the Congress members and so on do the bidding of Israel. So how is it? I think you're in a sense downplaying it. It's not, if it would be
It's
like the 50th state like Utah or something, they wouldn't get us into wars.
Are they
It's
doing the
like,
bidding of Israel? Because it's their bidding too. They're just saying it's Israel's bidding. They're
okay, but
allowing the lobby to come in, and they're separating their own accountability for what they want, and they're saying, "Oh, look, it's them who's doing it." Isn't that the whole point? They are still doing it. They both want the same thing. They both achieve the same thing. They use the same function, but once the function is used, they say, "Okay, we're going to now have the lobby do most of the work, and so we can detach blame over to the lobby." And that's exactly what happens. Yet all parts of this system, including the Americans and the Israelis, want what is effectively an apocalyptic Armageddon ending.
yeah, that's what I wanted to ask, because what is the interest of the CIA for the wars in the Middle East? I mean, that's not in the interest of America,
Oh,
of
it is.
course, but what's the interest of the CIA there?
Well, if you go back, and this is when I it's really strange. Two main series I focused on. I focused on Pottinger and Junkermann, and then I also focused on writing about the history of Klaus Schwab, the rise of Klaus Schwab, his father, the model Nazi company, Schwab's recruitment by Kissinger, his involvement in Kissinger's international seminar, which of course is a CIA-funded program, being given mentors to go back and create the World Economic Forum and create these young global leader programs. So they got leadership groups, leadership training programs that are like Kissinger's international seminar. I went through all of that, and these things are actually intertwined. We discover that Jeffrey Epstein was nominating people for World Economic Forum young global leaders like Junkermann herself. We find that these two worlds are very linked. And one of the things I did was I followed Kissinger's world. You have to understand Henry Kissinger if you're going to understand how foreign policy nowadays has evolved, and it is an evolution, a process. So it's different than what maybe Kissinger imagined initially, but it's still an evolution from what is, I like to say, Kissingerian dynamic, but I've never heard that term used. But what I discovered was there was a man who was as important in this system to Kissinger. He was a very important Zionist called Guido Goldman, who was also at Harvard. And when Kissinger's international seminar was shut down because it was revealed it was CIA funded in 1967, they started putting together new leadership courses that were CIA linked. And it was people like David Rockefeller and stuff who set up this group. This was it was kind of like it looks like a mafia. With the opening of the German Marshall Fund looks like it's the mafia out there. Honestly, there's indistinguishable. They look like it's the Goodfellas. It's quite amazing. Willy Brandt comes along, does his speeches, and he hands over a load of power. And what the German Marshall Fund was for, and I'll get round to your main question, but it's important I go through this. What the German Marshall Fund was for was to for Germany to pay the CIA to create the neoconservative vision of non-governmental development organizations that could create their non-governmental organizations that could eventually affect the Soviets. So the Germans were paying the CIA to bring down the wall and to effectively end the Soviet era. And it worked eventually, of course. It worked. And Guido Goldman was really important in that. Now, Guido Goldman's father, who Henry Kissinger's mother was their kosher maid, was Guido Goldman's father's kosher maid.
What is kosher maid?
To make sure the food was kosher for the Jewish food was kosher. So Henry Kissinger's mother was the kosher maid for Guido Goldman's father. Guido Goldman and Henry Kissinger, they lived in a flat together, bachelor pad, while Kissinger was in the White House. They were like, Guido Goldman would organize Henry Kissinger's 50th birthday party, which happened just after they had discovered that Henry Kissinger had been spying on all of the journalists and politicians just after Watergate. And all the people attending the party were all being asked, how do you feel about Henry Kissinger spying on you? And they were like, oh, we're fine about it. We understand these things have to go on. And the journalists are going in. Guido Goldman was central. His father was Nahum Goldman. And Nahum Goldman was a founding father of Israel. He was one of the most prominent. He was the head of the World Zionist Organization. This is an extremely important. This guy was given, when the UN offices opened up, they didn't give an office to Palestine, but they gave an office to Nahum Goldman to lobby for Israel straight from the off. And this is because, when you look through how Nahum Goldman worked, he is very, people should know a lot more about him. He explains a lot more about our history once you understand Nahum Goldman. But in the 70s, I think it was in the early 70s, he was talking to a Canadian newspaper, and he explained the importance of Israel to America. And this is really important if you think about why the Middle East is important. Well, okay, we know that they want, Americans and the CIA want a strong Israel. They want Israel to develop and grow. They want Israel to be greater Israel for a reason. And Nahum Goldman said, it's not for the resources that Israel offer, even though there's an abundance. It's not for the soils, which are rich in all sorts of stuff. It's not for the seas. It's not for the skies. It is for the fact that Israel is the military strategic center of world control and dominance. If you want to actually attack anybody in the world, you want to attack Asia, the Middle East, Russia, Turkey, Iran, Africa, Europe, there is only one place in the world where you can efficiently launch such military power and prowess, your prowess that you've got like the Americans, and that will eventually be Greater Israel. Because if you have to have military world control, you need it at the most strategic central place. And anybody who's played Axis and Allies, anybody who's played Risks, knows that you're aiming for Turkey, the Middle East, Iran, you're aiming for that area. And they knew that very early on. They wanted, for when they first created the CIA, they said, we need to focus on the Middle East, because the Middle East is that strategic point, and the Soviets will go there first, and they were right. And the first coups that the Kermit Roosevelt organized for the CIA was, of course, overthrowing King Farouk in Egypt, strategically, obviously, why, and installing NASA, who soon turned across to the Soviets, and was the reason why they needed a Kissinger's international seminar, so they could train leaders and put them into these positions, and they would be able to trust them to be on their side afterwards. But also then Iran next door, Mohammad Mossadegh, that was destabilizing the region on behalf of protecting Israel, making sure that these, and a lot of the leaders of these countries said it. They said, we completely despise the creation of the state of Israel, and eventually we will take it down. But we're not strong enough to do that at the moment. The military might of the Western world post-World War II was still phenomenal. They were in control of every single means of military power, and the Middle East knew that. So it wasn't until 1967 that they felt emboldened enough, the neighbors of Israel felt emboldened enough to try and make a move. And then that was once that happened, the American public, their sentiment turned to protecting Israel. Before, there had been a very pro-Palestinian sentiment in America. The majority of people were pro-Palestinian. In 1967, everything changed, and that's when everything changed. The CIA changed tack, they changed operations. They said, we now have our foothold in the military strategic center of world domination and control, which is Israel. So that's why I think it's important. That's why the CIA want it.
Yeah, to your point, Lindsey Graham just said all the wars in the future will be planned in Israel or something like that. But I would argue, I just wrote an article about it in a German magazine. Isn't it more about the families behind all of that? Because I researched which families are connected to the Rothschilds, and all the families connected to the Rothschilds are also involved in the Epstein, not all of them, some of them in the Epstein case. And I would argue the Rothschilds are above the Mossad, above the CIA, because this is the richest family. Of course, they hide it, but I calculated in my latest book that they have much more trillions than they say. So isn't it, the top of the pyramid are calling the shots? Because, for example, you mentioned the Rockefellers. The Rockefellers and the Rothschilds are longer in bed than most people think. So, but the Rockefellers were a new getting rich family. So if you partner with the Rothschilds, who is calling the shots? It's the Rothschilds. So isn't that the top of the pyramid? And the Rothschilds just, let's say, trick the CIA or whoever, the Americans. Oh, you need us there in Israel to get their way. Isn't that more like that?
I think that from my research, that the CIA are a function of the big families. I tried to explain. Someone asked me, who are they? Who are they? Because I kept referring to them, they, and people often think I'm referring to the Rothschilds or the Rockefellers or the big families, and and to an extent I am, because who they are the people who have enough of the wealth and the foresight and the ability to know the change in technology and how to remain in a state of technological evangelism, so can create the next technology. So you fundamentally got control of the very basic parts of the technology, and you get the wealth from it. Those people will invest in whatever's big and whatever's right for them to invest in. So those people are investing in what SpaceX, or investing in Apple, investing in whatever technology is going to bring them into the future. And the only people who can really invest big time in those are these big families anyway. So that system allows for that rise to the top. But I argue that there is no top to this pyramid, and there's two things that I want to say. First of all, I probably I do put forward the ballroom of power for you, like a more of a plateau on a pyramid. It gets up to a certain point where there's a load of tables, and all of the people in the ballroom of power are swapping tables over all of the time, and they're all having fun, because being human as well is very much you're living in the moment, and you're being given often relatively binary decisions that you say yes or no to, and there's a better decision and a worse decision, and you usually pick the better choice every time. This is why algorithms can be created. This is why we can predict things in the future. And so a lot of these people who exist in this ballroom of power are just swapping tables, and those tables give them a certain amount of power in this. But as more technology is understood, and as it broadens out and people get more access to it, the size of this ballroom gets bigger. There's not necessarily, the Rothschild have a seat at every single table in this ballroom. It doesn't mean that they control the entire table, because you have to relinquish a certain amount of control to evangelists, to people who are going to make the changes. You have to, if you want to, this is what they know. They know that if they want to remain in control, then they've got to hand over that certain amount of power to evangelists. Now, the second point I want to make.
What do you mean? Explain, please. What do you mean by evangelists?
Well, in this sense, like technological evangelists, what they'll do is when a technology is posited for the future, for instance, like the internet, you can imagine creating the internet. But if you're the one guy, Tim Berners-Lee, who is sitting around imagining it, and you could probably say these people are watching Usenet, so they're watching the precursors to the internet, and they're watching. They know they have a little bit more knowledge about the other technologies that are involved. They see, to make this work on a large scale, we're going to need this technology to be created, and this technology, and it doesn't exist right now. And then you have to go to companies, and you have to convince companies to make technology that won't be needed now, but will be needed in the very near future for other technologies to work, and for infrastructures to be built en masse. And so a lot of the technologies we're seeing today are, when I talk about Kissinger and these guys, I talk about 1967, 1968. I often talk about something called the year 2000, a book. Well, it was a paper written by Herman Kahn out of the Hudson Institute while he was working for the State Department. It predicts a lot of the future technologies that are coming, and they are really accurate. And a load of them haven't been achieved yet. There's still a lot that haven't quite. A load of them that haven't quite got, and some of which are just like, this might happen. We don't know if it's even possible. But to understand what might come in the future, you can then understand what you need to make that work. Now let's go across to the other thing, the CIA. So if you see the CIA somewhere upon that pyramid, they're not anywhere near the top. They're a function of lighting up the pyramid. They're a function of control and communication in between the members who are within the pyramid. They're a kind of separate entity, like the CFR. They're not quite on the top. They're an organizational structure. If you go to America, this is a good way to kind of, like, I suppose, switch your idea of what the CIA is. If you go to America and you look at the Joint Special Operation Command, the JSOC, and the SEAL Team 6 and those Tier 1 units, you realize that they're above the CIA. They're doing the exact same thing the CIA is doing at a military level, behind the scenes. There are no records. There will be no Epstein files. You will not know anything that's there. So the CIA is actually, once you realize that those guys exist and they do exactly the same function as the CIA, but in a completely black ops, a heavily funded, totally secret way, then you realize, okay, all of this underneath, these are just the serving maids. These are the kosher maids. These are the kosher maids. They're the ones to make sure your food is prepared in the proper way. The system works. The information works. The people within the system get what they want. The CIA is an intelligence function for the elite to create the world of the future that they're envisioning. And they're envisioning through think tanks and through academics. Then they're going to the government and they're saying, look at this vision we have. And the government look at it and they say, that's wonderful. We need to convince the people. They go to the bohemians, they go to the actors, they go to the musicians, they pay the masses of money to the influencers who can actually get that message across. And that's the constant thing that we see in the constant stream. It's the same as the free camps in Bohemian Grove, where these same rich families, rich elites, the government, the academics, and the bohemians go together to congress. And that's really what the ballroom of power is.
But how do you explain, for example, that JFK, the JFK assassination is broadly blamed on the CIA, but it most likely the Israel was behind it. So that doesn't fit into
Again,
your
that's
theory.
black and white. That's black and white. When you actually look, because I mean, I'll point different people's work. I like Corey Hughes. Corey Hughes is I've had him on the show on a fair few occasions on my various shows. He loves information. I don't always agree with him, and I think some of the stuff he comes some of the conclusions are speculation he comes to. But him and a lot of other people who work on those cases will say that Israel were involved. Yes, they were. And the CIA were involved. Yes, they were. And the mafia were involved. And yes, they were. Carlos Marcello was all over that stuff. You know, that there was people. Yeah, there was people on every level in every single and during that period in the early 60s and the late 50s and through the 60s and the early 70s, it stops around. I would say in the 70s, this slows down really quickly. But the mafia are being used as a form of intelligence, the same way that the CIA is working, the same way Israel's working. Their underground intelligence criminal networks that are able to commit sanctions outside the state's control. And then eventually the best of the mafia, I say the best, what I mean is the worst, yes. The ones who can function the best within this evil system, who have they get jobs in intelligence, they get jobs in the CIA, they get recruited into and then the CIA and a lot of the British intelligence and others just turn on the mafia straight away and just take it all down all at once, so it takes over all of its territory and is in full control. That we see in Britain as well during that period, where the Cray twins, who were involved, they were big gangsters. Well, they were involved in the East End. They moved to the West End in 1960 when they bought ownership of Esmeralda's barn. They're suddenly in with the elites. They're hanging around with the royals. They're hanging around in the elite satanic sex parties organized by Horace Dibbin, recorded in detail by the man himself, attended by some of the people who were the most famous people in the world, and with people having sex with his Pygmalion girl, his wife Mariella Novotny, who was, of course, snuck out of JFK's bedchamber by the CIA and FBI just after he was elected and just before he got put into office and made president. So these people are all in the same, across the channel as well, all around the world. They go to their different places. These people hang around in yachts, in islands. They hang around in far-flung places where they all hang around together, and they collude together. It's not a surprise that they collude together. So this, like, it's only Israel or it's only America or it's only... I never believe that, because the evidence always points that if Israel need to get someone who's not Israeli to do something for them, they'll go to them and they'll collude with them. And if that person's bottom line
or they blackmail him.
Yeah, but also I think the blackmail line is a really, that's a black and white. It's not as easy as that. There's blackmail. There is definitely high level, straight up compromise. We've got a picture of you, blah de blah de blah. Look, you're in trouble if you don't do what we say. There is that. That is probably 1% of all of it, because you have also the people who get involved with the mafia, get involved with these other people, are colluding with them, and so are in bed with them, and they share the same fate as them. If they're going to end up being put into jail for something, then their mates go down with them. They're on the party boat, and you can't get off the party boat once you're on. So that's not like black or white either. It's a range of blackmail. People compromise themselves. We are still humans. We all have our quirks and the things that we like, and we do compromise ourselves, whether it's sexually, whether it's drugs, whether it's some gambling, whatever it may be. People have a tendency to have a weakness, and that weakness is something that people habitually, they don't only, it doesn't only get taken advantage of by an outside force. Most of the time people indulge in their weaknesses themselves, so it's not like it's forced upon them. It's something that people just do because they're quirky.
We have one loose end. I wanted to ask that before. You said Pottinger was a CIA agent. Is he really an agent, or did he work together with the CIA? To be precise here.
So again, there was a long career to see to Stan Pottinger, especially with his involvement in the CIA. So my thought is he's recruited probably in about school time. I think most of the people, I've talked to a lot of other people who have had this experience where their parents were approached while they were in school, and they were asked if they would come and be involved in CIA programs, but their parents weren't allowed to come along with them. There's a lot of this sort of stuff. But I think Stanley Pottinger, his aptitude, his results, his grades, were his sporting. I mean, he was the top quarterback. He was the top rated in maths and science. Everything, he knew how to do everything. He was involved in loads of different groups in Harvard, so they were able to spot him very early, and in school very early, able to recruit him very early. When you start seeing him involved in stuff that is CIA linked, it's his control while he's in the Office of Civil Rights, and then moves on to the Justice Department. And in those positions, first of all, he's cutting his teeth. He's young. He's learning how to do the trade. But by 1973, he's involved in investigating things like the assassination of Martin Luther King, being involved in the standoff with Wounded Knee. That was a very awkward position where a load of Native Americans took us an area called Wounded Knee, which was historically a place where a load of Indians had been massacred once upon a time, and it was because it had been taken over by a corrupt chief, and it ended up with a standoff between the American military National Guard and the Indians, and there was firing going on, and there was battles going on each night. Stanley Pottinger was brought in to just break the American Indian movement. He was brought in, and he did just that. He was brought in to manage Kent State massacre. When the kids in Kent State killings were very famous. Four kids died. Protests on the campus. The National Guard fired, and multiple people said there was an order to fire. They looked at all the evidence. They bring Stanley Pottinger in at these points to manage the evidence, manage the cases. You see it happen. Now, the time when we really see him interacting properly with the CIA was in 1976. 1976, the assassination of Orlando Letelier on Washington's Embassy Row in Washington, D.C. itself. Pinochet has organized an Operation Condor, which was, of course, arranged. Pinochet's trained by the CIA. He's put through the School of the Americas. They all enacted Operation Condor, which was really a CIA operation to get these states to work with them, and the right-leaning South American states to work with them. They blew up Orlando Letelier, who had been on the Allende administration, they blew him up in his car outside the Chilean embassy on Embassy Row in 1976. There was a guy who was put in charge of the case, Eugene Proper, from the State Department. Or Justice Department, wherever he was from, Eugene Proper. As soon as he started on the case, Stanley Pottinger came in, and Stanley Pottinger said, "We should go see my good friend George H.W. Bush." And George H.W. Bush was the head of the CIA at this time. And they went. He took Eugene Proper to the CIA, and he said him and Stanley Pottinger went and met George H.W. Bush. And George H.W. Bush said, "I tell you what, we really would like to help you in solving this case. But for that, we need you to allow us to spy domestically on American citizens." And Eugene Proper said, "Oh, this is going to be hard." And Stanley Pottinger said, "Well, my good friend George H.W. Bush, I can go back to the Department of Justice and do a little bit of wiggling, and we can sign it off as a temporary measure because of this assassination, which of course derives from lots of CIA programs, that the CIA got legal rights signed by Stanley Pottinger into law that they were able to spy domestically. And so that happened in 1977. That's a big sign that he's worked. Now, over the next 4 years, George H.W. Bush is the head of the CIA. He's going to eventually run as vice president after trying to get president. He tries to get the presidential nomination at first against Ronald Reagan. They're going to go against Carter. Now, for anybody who knows that election, the Iranian hostage crisis happens in 1979. The hostages are being held. There is something that later on is called the October Surprise. And the October Surprise is a very interesting moment in history. It's when the CIA organized with Iranian officials behind the back door to hold the American hostages for past October so that the election would swing from Carter to Bush and Reagan and allow Bush into office. The plan was probably to off Reagan, who gets shot within about 3 months, of course. So we can see what the
From
plan is.
Hinckley, who was, I think the brother or father was at a Bush event during the time of
literally, it's so amazing. There was so many crossovers with the families. I mean, I've looked through that recently. It's very interesting. The newspaper articles of the time, they were all like, "Oh, isn't this amazing?" Coincidentally, they were just going to hang around and have dinner together at the event the next day. Well, who would think that? But regardless, if we go back to who arranged the October Surprise on behalf of his very good friend George H.W. Bush, who we can find evidence of him colluding with beforehand during the assassination of Orlando Letelier, but J. Stanley Pottinger, who it was his idea to run Iran-Contra. Him and Cyrus Hashemi, who they were in a law firm together. It looks like it was a bit of a CIA law firm. It might be a financial firm in actual fact, but the law. John Stanley Pottinger just represented a guy called Gerald Bull, who had been smuggling weapons to some CIA-backed rebellion somewhere and had been caught. So he's obviously helping out. He helps another business fight a lawsuit against Armand Hammer, who, of course, was kind of in bed with the Russians and was a spy in himself. And it looked like he was handling only spy businesses around this time. So in 1980, he and Cyrus Hashemi go to the CIA and they say, "Hey, we got this idea. We could go and we could do some sort of gun smuggling operation in Iran. And in return, they would hold the hostages and we get our boy into power, George H.W. Bush." And they said, "We don't want to go on."
And there's also the Epstein connection again, right? With the
Yes.
Iran-Contra. So Pottinger was also involved there, and now he is supposedly on the side of the victims, right? So that's super strange.
Well, Well, it's not. He was not on just Central. He went to the CIA. The CIA said, "No, we don't want to do this." And he had to go back again and convince them, because he was working with Cyrus and Jamshid Shemi, and they had such a bad reputation. The CIA didn't want to work with them. They had to convince them. Stanley Pottinger had to convince them. And then they had a load of meetings in Barcelona and Madrid that were with Ayatollah Khomeini's nephew, Pasandida, I think his name was. And basically they organized the whole thing. Then when they're running the guns, it is Epstein and Pottinger start sharing an office during this period, and Epstein's organizing the funding for the running of guns to Iran. At the same time, Bill Clinton, of course, Epstein's big buddy, is helping finance the Fumina, Arkansas, while he's the governor, helping finance the Contra side. So Iran-Contra, the CIA, and the CIA, they're going to enter. They got the White House. Well, in 1980, when that happened, it all worked out perfectly, and they got the White House. Now, then, in 1984, it was revealed by federal authorities they had been spying on Stanley Pottinger and Cyrus Hashemi the entire time, because they thought they were criminal, and they had discovered that they were actually behind the entire October surprise, and this led to a load of potential criminal convictions. Soon, Rudy Giuliani, was the one to decide who was going to be prosecuted and whether he was actually going to prosecute Pottinger himself. And this was out in the New York Times. This is not like small in the conspiracy theory. This was out in the New York Times. Giuliani said at the time, "We're looking into whether we prosecute Pottinger." Pottinger moves out to Mexico. In 2-3 years ago, I spoke to Rudy Giuliani myself on a recorded X space, and I asked him why he chose not to prosecute Stanley Pottinger, and he said he couldn't remember that at all, which I think was a downright lie. He knows why he didn't prosecute them, because he was a CIA. Pottinger goes off to Mexico. He hides out for a bit. Then he comes back. They have eventually the October Surprise Task Force, which is about a bit of a truth and reconciliation effort. They redact loads of the information about Pottinger. There's a load of legal wrangling. They hide a lot of information. By this time, Pottinger's been working for the deep state for so long. He's obviously protected. And then 1990, he buys his house just at the same time. Epstein's buying his house 500 meters away from each other. They've already worked with each other, shared an office with each other, and Pottinger will go on to become Epstein's victims legal counsel. So what is that if not changing American history? This is the guy who signed off Watergate. He investigated Watergate. He interviewed the head of the CIA through Watergate, Helms himself. He says, "I interviewed Helms myself, so you can trust that stamp." He was the guy who looked through the evidence of the assassination of Martin Luther King and found there was no conspiracy. And later court cases have said, yes, there was definitely some form of conspiracy. We're just trying to understand what it is.
Yeah, I mean, Rudy Giuliani oversaw 9/11, but so he's not officially a CIA agent, but it's just your suspicion. But what was the last thing you said? Because something jumped into my head there. What was the last thing you said?
Getting the last thing I said is a hard thing.
yeah, because something jumped into my head. I made another connection. Okay, I have to rewatch the video.
This is one of the things about these cases, though. There's so much involved in that. So there's so much involved. The idea that he's a CIA agent, it comes to a point where you have to say that the prima facie evidence is so much that you're no longer assuming it. You're just watching it happen, and you just haven't been told it yet. Because his position for the Epstein's victims, and the way he came into that, even his own business partner repeats over and over again, I think he's a CIA. He's David Bowie's Winston Wolfe. And these people, if you look at the cases they take, well, David Bowie's his business partner through one point, Stanley Parker's business partner.
Explain who that is, please. Explain who that is.
An extremely famous lawyer who cut his teeth initially in the Drexel Burnham Lambert Ponzi scheme, investigating that, where 70% of the money that was ripped off by Drexel Burnham Lambert was actually government bonds.
Sorry, hold your thought. I know now what I wanted to say, because I see a pattern here. Because the guy, the coroner, Bowden or something, which was hired by the brother of Epstein, he said, yeah, he was killed. But Bowden also was involved in the JFK committee and said, no, it's all right. So my suspicion here is that there's a double play, that this Bowden guy just says, yeah, he was killed because in reality, he's alive. What do you think of that theory? Because why is this guy involved?
I think we're at a time of deep fifth generation warfare, and within this case, victims and perpetrators have been offered a range of witness protection programs that have never been offered before, or we've never really found out about before, and we know are in existence. I would believe that the majority of people that we think are dead in this case are actually possibly just renamed. A lot of plastic surgery involved, a lot of other things. They can do anything nowadays. I think that the Terramar project was clear. They were trying to make a sea base out in the middle of nowhere where no ships pass, no planes pass, where there's a whole world going on that we don't know about. There's plenty of places where that can happen. These people are in control of such large tracts of land. Same down with Patagonia. If you go down Patagonia way, if you go down to I lived in Chile. I lived about 400 miles away from Patagonia. If you go down to Patagonia, it's all owned by a few rich Americans. There's ways to just keep away from everybody, hide away. Why wouldn't you? Why, if you look at some of the plea deals that were given, one of the reasons why Maria Farmer or other people are able to say things that aren't true constantly is because they took the Alford plea. And the Alford plea, which is coincidentally called the Kennedy plea, is a plea where you can claim innocence after accepting your guilt. So you say, I am guilty, but because I'm taking this plea deal, I'm allowed to say I'm innocent in public. That is like taking away the whole idea of justice, the whole idea of reality, the whole idea of truth. Someone can go and lie and be protected by a plea deal because they've given evidence which you don't get to see all of the details of. That causes already a jolt in reality. Now, I think that's all across the board.
That's secret, of course, right? That's secret. Nobody knows about these deals.
Yeah, but I would say that Jeffrey Epstein is probably alive. I would say that Virginia Giuffre is probably alive. I would say that the fact that the idea of plastic surgery just before being the biggest witness in the biggest case in history that was only going to get bigger and worse, that who else would you give some form of witness protection deal to if not that exact person? If you wanted the most extreme witness protection program, who are you going to give it to? And with Epstein, what you see within these files that are the worst that you think you can see as not the worst that you think you can see. And there is no doubt at all that both Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein had a lot of information on a lot of big, very important people, and at any time that information was set to drop if anything happened to them. And that, I think, is still the case. These people, however much they show us, there's probably a load of stuff that we're not getting to see, and is the reason why they faked so many deaths. What's the chances when they're taking Epstein's body out, that they would leave his face uncovered, that you would get to see him? When do you get to see the guy writing the article is the same guy in Eyes Wide Shut, who's the article name that no one can really find who this journalist is. It's like The fifth generation warfare is them taking the piss out of us all. They are making it into a joke in front of us, and we still play by the rules. Me and you, we're still playing by the rules. We're still saying, oh, but these are the rules of the game. Yes, they're breaking them constantly and they don't play by those rules. But if we play by these rules, we can hold them to account. We never hold them to account by the rules we play by. We're playing by, it's an unfair game. And all of this, I have got to say, Jeffrey Epstein, yeah, probably alive.
What do you think about the pizza code in there? I mean, for me, it's clear. What do you think about that?
I think that we know that there's code words for all sorts of things, and some of the worst in society who all know what each other are doing, know those code words and use those code words. But I also think that the release of all of this information is no accident. I think it is centrally a function of Lieutenant General Michael Flynn's fifth generation military warfare tactics that he is employing against the entire Western world, if not the globe. And of course, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, who was at one point involved in the JSOC organizations, the head of the Director of Intelligence Agency as well. You've got a really important man whose protege, whose main guy, who's the guy who is now running the operations he wanted to run now that he's retired. His name is Matthew Pottinger. He is the son of John Stanley Pottinger, the main person who's the head of fifth generation warfare tactics for the US military. His protege is Matthew Pottinger, and that cannot be understated how suspicious that is. It is part of the operation. In fact, when the FAE was created, this fake organization that was created that was so suspicious, next door was Matthew Pottinger living just next door. They live next door to each other. And I think there's a lot of operations going on here, a lot of black operations. I think it's not a surprise that one of the people who were involved in this is not only linked to General Michael Flynn, but is also an expert on China. Because what we're seeing in the Western world is going to be enacted everywhere. And this is something that is going to be the focus. The military tactics that our governments use are tested on its own people beforehand. We've seen this throughout all of our history. When they want to test what spraying from the sky looks like, when they want to spray zinc cadmium sulfide, when they want to spray E. coli, strains of E. coli, and see what rates of hospitals increase in which areas. That happened in Britain for 100 years. They do it for a reason. They do it to test on their own people, so then they can test it on other people. And that's what it is. It's a military tactic. It's causing you not to know what's up and what's down. That's where we are. So it's not a surprise that these pizza revelations and stuff are also, and QAnon and all of these sort of things are just flooding the zone with information that you can't make sense of.
But why was Michael Flynn then driven out of the Trump administration? And I don't see him saying suspicious things. For example, he defended Candace Owens recently, so I don't see him doing.
Candace Owens is fifth generation warfare at its finest. She's like Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, all those guys. I mean, Tucker Carlson goes for a job at the CIA when he leaves university, and they didn't give it to him. Of course, they didn't give it to him. Then he becomes the biggest presenter in the world. I put my tongue in my cheek and I say that Candace Owens comes along. She does a load of videos where she calls it One Nation Under Blackmail. Why is that? So that people, when they type in One Nation Under Blackmail, will find Candace Owens and not Whitney Webb's books. Candace Owens is a function of it. And the function of the fifth generation warfare is to get as many people speaking about this stuff as possible. So to have people and to boost these people, what was the QAnon files saying about General Michael Flynn all the way through? You can trust Michael Flynn. You can trust Michael Flynn. You can trust Michael Flynn. What's Michael Flynn's recent books been about? military-grade, fifth-generation warfare tactics and how to utilize them. What has he been doing for years? Working for black op operations where targets U.S. citizens with disinformation and misinformation. Who is he linked with as well? Well, a load of people who were setting up on Russia Today. There was a lot of the Russia Today crowd, and there was a load of, if you've ever seen the email leaks about his involvement in Russia Today, you can see that they were involved. They were organizing things behind the scenes. He is fifth generation warfare pioneer. His protege is the son of one of the most prolific CIA men in human history, and the whole of this enterprise of massive voices, influencers who are boosted up the wazoo, are run exactly by these people for this reason.
But wouldn't it be stupid to write a book about fifth generation warfare and then applying it himself?
No, because they get away with absolutely anything they do, and he is the lead tactician on military grade fifth generation warfare for the tier 1 operators. He was part of the JSOC group. He's part of the tier 1 black ops. I mean, you don't get there and not do tier 1 black ops. So I mean it's like a bacon, not bacon.
Then let's talk about Candace Owens, because I follow every one of her shows, so I know a little bit about her. I see it as an organic thing. I mean, she changed her mind about Israel because she learned it. For me, that is all organic. Well,
so she's working for the Daily Wire with Ben Shapiro.
Back then, she didn't know it better. So because they tried to co-opt you, she worked with. Just a second,
it's a
please.
coy story. It's a coy fairy tale made up. It sounds like a fairy tale to me. It sounds like she's working with Ben Shapiro, the king of logical fallacies, who's obviously a Zionist, but implanted within the media and projected and boosted out by all the same platforms. All of the other people on the Daily Wire.
Yeah, but now she's going against them. Well,
that's called managing a Hegelian dialectic. You've got the Daily Wire. You had a load of people opposing them, and then when the war, when Israel went into Gaza, what you had was a massive surge of opinion go against people like Ben Shapiro. You saw all the Daily Wire come under pressure, and they reposed her. They picked her up, and they put her as the manufactured antithesis of a very clear, visible, and obvious Hegelian dialectic. She is one pole of an obvious Hegelian dialectic. They've said our best friend, who's a black woman that was gaining some form of virtue because she was black and she was a woman and she was on our network. She's now going to be used as a tool. Then we're going to put her over here and she's going to say the opposite and be really nasty to us. And everybody concentrates still on the same two people. Before they were concentrating on the same two people. Once they stop concentrating on one of those people, they say, okay, quickly, let's not lose that power. Let's create the Hegelian dialectic ourselves, the two poles. Let's manage them. That's what their main game is. Just before Candace Owens became super famous, there was all of these videos coming out. And it was a looped video of Candace Owens nodding at something somebody was saying. And the original video wasn't actually a Candace Owens video. There was accounts, and I started contacting these accounts too and saying, what is this? Because this is just full-on propaganda. You're trying to make it look like Candace Owens is interviewing this person. And they're not. It's just a looped video of her going like this while someone does something with emotional music that's trending at the time. They manipulate the algorithm by using these exact things that people want to tweet the person saying something that's important, inspiring, and they're automatically linking it with Candace Owens. That's a trick. If I did that, I would be a dirty, rotten bastard, and you could call me a dirty, rotten bastard. If I had a load of people making clips where it looks like I'm listening to someone someone, but I'm not, I would be cheating you. I would be a dirty, rotten cheat who shouldn't be listened to because you're a lying little bastard. And that's what I would be, but I'm not. I don't do that because, well, I'm not that type of person. Candace Owens is definitely that type of person, hanging around with a load of dirty rats, and then she opposes the rats, but still just incorporates more rats because she brings in other people who I've also called out for obviously being constructs. I mean, there were people like Ian Carroll who come along. They take my research, they take Whitney's research, they mention our names for the first 8 months. Then they stop reporting on what we're reporting on, and we're going to them. I'm going to Ian Carroll. I'm saying, hey, can you report on Elon Musk's relationship with Epstein? I'm going 2024. I'm sending him links. I'm saying he's ignoring me. 6 months. He's using the work to become known, using a load of different Epstein researchers' work to become known. And then once they're known, they control the narrative and they start talking about whatever and ignoring the people.
That's another guy I follow. So he was at Tucker Carlson. Many people complained, of course, because he's new to all these topics. But he showed the book of Whitney Webb in the show. So I think he has a bad conscience.
And he tried to reframe the book. He tried to reframe the book. What he tried to do is make it all about Israel. And even Whitney had to come out and say openly, what he's saying isn't quite right. It's a big globalist intelligence blob that includes the CIA, Israel, and other things. And he had to come out and do this weird, awkward sort of a kind of apology to it. Ian Carroll is still doing this. Now, Ian Carroll was on RFK Jr.'s bus, hanging off the side on the adverts, pushing him, publicizing him. He came on to my show, on the Johnny Vedmore show when I was on TNT, publicizing the whole RFK. It was a political tool. It get the Epstein people into his area. Not only does he control the information, he gets famous himself, he gets boosted himself, but he then gets put on like InfoWars, he gets put on this, he gets put on that, and everybody sees him and says, oh, that's the main guy who researches Epstein. Yeah, all of us who are researching Epstein, he's using our work and then selectively not reporting on Musk's relationship with Epstein. And if you try and get him to do that, he avoids it over and over again until, of course, now he's going to be able to, because the sanctioned release of the Epstein files allows people to speak about things. A lot of created content creators, manufactured content creators aren't just a rare thing. It's everything nowadays. The era of fifth generation warfare. If you either believe we're in the era of kinetic warfare or we've advanced to the era of fifth generation warfare. If you believe that we've advanced to the era of fifth generation warfare, then start looking around you, because 80% of the people out there will be constructed by military and conduits of military operations to trick you and to make you look at them and ignore the people who are bringing you facts directly. This is one of the main facets. So what I hear is around me a lot is people pushing the people who have been boosted because that's who they see in their stream and that's who they get to know. But if you look underneath them, there's things they're not saying, and the things that they report of ours, they're being very selective of. And even I'm sitting here complaining about it. And I openly tried to have a dialogue online with him for 6 months. And then I was like, okay, that's it now. I'm not doing it anymore because it is bull. It is bull. He is there employed by who? He's going to be boosted up by Elon Musk on X, most definitely. He was making money off it. He's going to be boosted up there by RFK Jr. Oh, definitely. He's hanging off the back of the election bus. He's going to be boosted up there in his stats by X, by all the rest of it, by other platforms too. It's for a reason.
So do you at least think that Candace Owens is really investigating Charlie Kirk?
I think that's just the CIA managing his own narratives. And what, is Charlie Kirk dead? I don't even know. It's the era of fifth generation warfare. We're not meant to know anything, and we're meant to have our perceptions managed constantly by the people who are in control of that information. So it looks to me like the people who take control of that information straight away are people like Candace Owens.
So is there anything real but you?
Everything is, my friend, everything is real. Everything is not real. It's fifth generation warfare. So we can't, I say to everybody, get into your communities, start having conversations with people in your communities about the things that matter. Eventually, that helps massively. I spent the past 7 years being shouted at about COVID, about Epstein, about all the different things, being called all sorts of names. Now I have people who come up to me and say, hey, wow. They don't actually say you were right. They say, hey, it turns out you weren't lying, because they thought I was lying. And then they get into a conversation with you, and you become a point where, because you've been nice to them, even when they're calling you names, they are willing to then speak to you when they're not calling you names at a different level. And you're within the community. This is the only place you can make change, because you go out there onto the online world and look, scroll through the death scroll, doom scroll. What are you doing? You are becoming Nietzsche's last man. Nietzsche's last man gets his instructions from his master constantly. Nietzsche's last man checks his Fitbit to make sure that the Ubermensch is telling him exactly how he's supposed to live his life. There's a lot to be said about the fact that we're entering into these days where people have handed over their responsibility and accountability to technology, and they think they're handing it over to technology. In actual fact, they're handing it over to the technocrats who are in control of technology, and they're the ones who are able to manipulate those people. So the link there is the technological aspect of it. When you say about, do you know what's real? I do. I go out on the streets and I talk with people and I have a great time, and I exist. I have weird things happen in my life. I have intelligence agents try and come into my life in real world, on digital world, in loads of different ways. And I have to live somewhere between naive and paranoid all of the time, somewhere balanced in between. And that's your reality is always going to be your created reality, your chosen reality. You're always going to decide which seat you look on and which direction you're looking out to anyway. So you've got to hold on to what's real in your own world, and remember that the people who are trying to trick you are all around you. They are all around you, and they're tricking all your friends too. And they're very good at what they're doing. But the biggest sign of it is that they're being boosted. The biggest sign of it is that they're so popular in an unfair algorithm that I can tell you, I'm not saying this just because I'm being a whiny little boy. I got sent by X notes saying we have limited your reach. The moment
Yeah, it's obvious.
I
It's obvious. You
released
can
an
see that.
article about Epstein and Musk's relationship in 2024. They sent me a thing. They said, we have limited your, and after the elections, they unreleased it. And what does unrelease mean in a shadow banned world? Barely anybody knows my work anyway. That's because it's so shadow banned. Because if I was controlling, I would get boosted a lot more, wouldn't I? I get pushed up a lot more, but they don't. They hide us down. If they're boosted, be worried straight away.
I get that argument, but isn't there another explanation? That's the time constraint. For example, I wrote Candace Owens a few times and also Whitney Webb. Both didn't answer, and I wouldn't say it's some conspiracy. It's because they get thousands of emails. Isn't that also an explanation why they can't investigate everything? They get so many emails and they have to decide
Well, I
what
can tell you
topic they
from
choose.
I got to see um how Unlimited Hangout was from inside, because I wrote for it, and of course I was in a relationship with Whitney, and I can tell you that, yeah, they get a lot, but you have to make a decision very early on when you're a researcher, when you're a journalist like that. You've got to make a decision of who you have a conversation with, and Whitney keeps a very small circle, very small. I wouldn't say the reason why she doesn't respond to things is the same reason why Candace Owen doesn't respond to things. I think, but both of them is related to the control of information. You know, they can't even be even close to compared, because Whitney Webb is an extremely high class, amazing investigative journalist, and Candace Owens is an influencer. She's not investigating stuff. Other people are bringing her information, and she's saying this is her investigation, but she's not. She's
No,
not.
she's not saying that. She always thanks the public for.
Yeah, but
something.
the two. I mean, you cannot compare the two.
No, no.
What Whitney does is like people.
Yeah, but for example,
investigative
sorry,
journalist is a little bit
but
different.
Whitney is not really suppressed. She's everywhere, except on my show. But
Yeah, agreed.
she's not
Agreed.
really
But
suppressed.
I mean, it's hard. It's hard. There's, you know, it's harder for me to talk about that because I have a child with Whitney. We been in a relationship. It was complex, and I
don't want to get into it. Just the argument that she's also everywhere. She's not on Tucker Carlson, but she's. I mean, everybody knows her, rightly so.
you
Because
make that decision as an individual. You make that decision. I make a decision. I try and talk with absolutely everyone. I do that because I'm open and I want to be open, and I'm also accept that I may be wrong, or I'm willing to have my mind changed by somebody else.
Sorry. No, what I mean is no. What I mean is that she is not suppressed.
Yeah,
Her videos go around. So,
agreed.
To the argument, why is she not suppressed?
Agreed. That's all I can say is agreed.
Okay. Okay. Good.
I can't. I mean, I've talked in detail about all that sort of stuff. I just
okay. Good. Okay. Good. Well, that was a wild ride. So, as you all see, you have a very deep knowledge about everything. So I hope we can do that again about the next topic. Is there anything you want to say that I left out?
No, I tell you, I really enjoyed that because some of that was challenging. It is a really difficult media landscape. I know that there's a lot of people who are going to they're going to feel that a lot of, like, I think people think that questioning things that they love is a negative thing.
Right.
But real love holds up even under intense scrutiny. Real love holds up. And it's a positive thing to know where you are in the world, know who to trust, and know who loves you back. You can give out your love to someone, and this happens a lot with influencers. You give out your love to them, and they don't give you any love back. You give out information to them, they don't give any information back. At some point, you've just got to say that that's just a one-way relationship. The world is it's full of a load of different characters who have a load of different ways of communicating with people. But I think the most important thing is that we all have to be as open as possible and challenge things. So I really enjoyed that conversation. And I just say to people, my website is newspaste.com. I have certain people who go hire microtaskers to delist me from Google. So it's hard to actually find me sometimes. Most people just find my music. Come to Newspace, but you could type in Johnny Vedmore anyway, and it communicate. If you want to have a conversation with me, I always say this: if you want to have a conversation with me, reach out. Right, even if I don't contact you straight away, I will get back to you because I love to have a conversation. I love to be challenged. So I'd love to have another conversation again and again with you, Oliver. It's been really wonderful.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a very good closing line, and I hope we can do it again. Thank you very much.